I'm Nancy, and I was born into what you'd call an ordinary family. My childhood was pretty normal, I guess, but then came my little sister, 5 years younger than me, and boy was she a handful. From the get-go, she was different. While I was all yes, Mom, and sure, Dad, she was more like no way, and you can't make me. It was like living with a tiny tornado. My parents were at their wits' end. They tried everything, reasoning, punishments, rewards. Nothing worked. Finally, they took her to a psychologist. I was in the car when they came out of that appointment. Dad looked relieved, Mom worried. Well, I asked. Dad turned to me. The doctor says your sister has ADHD. It's why she's so energetic. Hyperactive, Mom corrected, her voice tight. He said hyperactive. From that day on, everything changed. My parents became obsessed with managing my sister's behavior. They read every book, tried every technique, and man, did they spoil her. It was like they were afraid of her, tiptoeing around to avoid setting her off. As we grew older, things only got worse. By the time I was 17 and prepping for college, my sister was a full-blown terror. I couldn't get a moment's peace to study. One night, I was trying to finish an important paper. My sister cranked up her music so loud the walls shook. I stormed into her room. Turn it down. I'm trying to work. She just stuck out her tongue. Make me. I went to our parents, fuming. Can't you do something about her? Mom looked exhausted. Nancy, please. You know your sister has a sensitive disposition. Just try to understand. Understand? She's driving me crazy. Dad sighed. We're doing our best. Maybe you could study at the library. I couldn't believe it. I was the one who had to leave. But that's how it always was. My sister came first, no matter what. Things came to a head a few months later. My sister announced she wanted to live with our grandmother, Dad's mom, a wealthy woman who lived across town. Grandma's gonna spoil me rotten, she bragged to me. And when she kicks the bucket, I'll get everything. You'll be working your butt off, and I'll be living it up. I wanted to slap that smug look off her face, but I just gritted my teeth and focused on my goal, getting into college and getting out of this house. Those 6 months my sister spent at Grandma's were like a dream. I could finally focus on my studies without constant interruptions. I threw myself into my work, determined to make the most of this peace and quiet. When graduation rolled around, I was on top of the world. I'd gotten into a decent public college in another city, and I was ready to start my new life. But as always, my sister had to rain on my parade. I was packing up my room when Mom came in, looking stressed. Your sister's coming home, she said.
I froze. What? Why?
Mom sighed. Your grandmother. Well, she's had enough. Says she can't handle your sister's behavior anymore. Later that night, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in hushed voices. ... says we're terrible parents, Dad was saying. Can you believe it? After everything we've done for that girl. Shay, keep your voice down, Mom whispered. What are we going to do now? Same thing we always do, Dad replied, sounding defeated. Try harder. Maybe this new psychologist will help. I shook my head. Same old story. But I was getting out soon, so I tried not to let it bother me. A few days before I was set to leave for college, my parents sat me down for a talk. Nancy, honey, Mom began, we're so proud of you for getting into college. But I said, sensing the catch. Dad cleared his throat. But, with your sister back home and all her needs, we just can't afford to help you with living expenses. I stared at them, disbelieving. Are you serious? You're cutting me off. Not cutting you off, Mom said quickly. We just think it's time you learn to be more independent. You're so capable, Nancy. We know you can handle it. I stormed out of the room, furious. They were punishing me for being the good kid, the responsible one. It wasn't fair. But I wasn't about to let this stop me. I found a part-time job waiting tables and started looking for the cheapest housing options near campus. It wasn't going to be easy, but I'd make it work. Then, out of the blue, Grandma called. Nancy, dear, she said, her voice warm. How are you holding up? I broke down and told her everything. About my parents cutting me off, about how they were bending over backwards for my sister again. Grandma listened quietly, then said, "Well, that just won't do. I'll help you, Nancy. You focus on your studies and I'll make sure you have a roof over your head." True to her word, Grandma started sending me money for rent. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep me afloat. I still had to work my butt off at the diner, but at least I didn't have to worry about being homeless. A few months into my first semester, Grandma even came to visit. We spent a whole weekend together, just talking and laughing. It was the first time in years I felt like someone in my family really saw me, really cared about what I wanted. "I'm sorry about your sister," Grandma said as we walked through a park near my dorm. I tried, I really did. But that girl, she's got your parents wrapped around her little finger. As I hugged Grandma goodbye at the bus station, I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a real ally in my family. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was done with college. I landed a decent job in the same city and decided to stick around. It was nice, building my own life away from the drama back home. I'd visit my parents occasionally, but I always seemed to miss my sister. Not that I was complaining. During one of these visits, I was sitting in the kitchen with Mom and Dad. The house felt eerily quiet without my sister's usual chaos. "Where's the little tornado?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Mom's face fell. "Oh, she's out. With friends. Again." Dad chimed in, his voice tired. "She's barely home these days. Disappears for weeks sometimes." I couldn't help but push a little. "So what's she doing instead? Just partying?" Mom wrung her hands. "She says she's networking. Making connections." Dad snorted. "That's one way to put it. She's got a new boyfriend every other week. I can't keep track of their names anymore." I sat back, taking it all in. Part of me wanted to say "I told you so," but what good would that do? They looked miserable enough already. Months passed, and I got the occasional update from my parents. My sister had scraped by and graduated high school barely. I was genuinely surprised she'd managed it at all. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from Mom. Her voice was a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Nancy, you'll never believe it. Your sister's getting married. His name is Robert. He's quite a bit older than her, but he seems very stable. And, wealthy." I could hear the relief in her voice. Maybe this would finally be the thing that settled my sister down. "Oh, and Nancy," Mom added, "your sister has a special request for a wedding gift. She wants us to pay for their honeymoon." I bit my tongue to keep from saying what I really thought. "That's quite a gift." "Yes, well, your father and I think it's worth it. If it makes her happy." A few weeks later, I found myself back home for the wedding. I'll admit, I was curious to see this guy who'd managed to pin down my wild child of a sister. When I met Robert, I was surprised, to say the least. He was tall, distinguished looking, with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet confidence. He shook my hand firmly and actually looked me in the eye when he spoke. It was a far cry from the usual losers my sister hung around with. The wedding itself was nice, tasteful even. My sister looked happy, twirling around in her white dress. Our parents beamed with pride. At the reception, Mom cornered me by the punch bowl. "Isn't this wonderful, Nancy? Your sister's really turned things around." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "You know," she continued, lowering her voice, "maybe it's time you started thinking about settling down too. I mean, look at your sister. She's got it all figured out now." I choked on my punch. "Mom, I'm just saying," she patted my arm. "It's something to think about." As I watched my sister and her new husband drive off to their fancy honeymoon, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling in my gut. Sure, everything looked perfect on the surface, but I knew my sister. This calm, settled life? It wasn't her. Not by a long shot. Back in my city, life went on. Work kept me busy, and I was finally feeling like I had my feet under me. Then I met Mike. It wasn't some fairy tale romance we met at a friend's barbecue, bonded over our shared love of terrible sci-fi movies, and started hanging out. Before I knew it, we were a couple. Mike was different, steady, reliable. He made me laugh, and more importantly, he made me feel seen. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could just be myself, without having to be the good one or the responsible one. 2 years flew by, and we got engaged. Planning the wedding was a whirlwind. I was determined to keep it small and drama-free, but I knew I had to invite my family. When I called to give them the news, Mom's reaction was, "Well, Mom." "Oh, Nancy." Finally, she gushed. "Oh, and I'm sure your sister will be so excited to help with the planning. She has such experience now, you know." I managed to dodge most of Mom's helpful suggestions, and before I knew it, the big day arrived. I was in the back room of the venue, adjusting my dress, when there was a knock at the door. It was my sister. "Hey, sis," she said, sauntering in. She was wearing a dress that was, well, let's just say it was more appropriate for a nightclub than a wedding. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Where's Robert? Is everything okay?" "Fine," she snapped. "Just drop it, okay?" The ceremony went off without a hitch. Mike and I said our vows, and for a moment everything was perfect. Then came the reception. As the night wore on, my sister got louder, more obnoxious. She was flirting with every guy in sight, including Mike's brother, who looked deeply uncomfortable. During the speeches, she clinked her glass so hard I thought it would shatter. Speech from the bride's little sis. I froze. This couldn't be good. She stood up, swaying slightly. Well, my big sister, finally tying the knot. Took you long enough, huh? I mean, I've been married for years now, but I guess some of us are just slower learners." There was an awkward titter from the crowd. I felt Mike's hand tighten on mine. "Anyway," my sister continued, her words slurring, "here's to the happy couple. May your marriage be as exciting as mine." She downed her champagne in one gulp and stumbled back to her seat. I plastered on a smile and tried to salvage the moment. "Thanks, sis. Now, who wants cake?" Later, as I watched my parents leave, herding my drunk sister into a cab, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sure. Disappointment. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the excuses. Mike came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You okay?" he murmured. I leaned back against him, letting out a long breath. Yeah, I'm okay." And I was. Because despite everything, I had a man who loved me, a life I'd built for myself. And for the first time, I truly believed that was enough. Life was good. Mike and I had settled into a comfortable routine, balancing work and our life together. We'd just celebrated our first anniversary when the call came. I was making dinner when my phone rang. Seeing it was my parents, I answered with a sigh. "Nancy," Mom's voice was strained. "We need to talk about your sister. It's Robert. He's left her." I stopped chopping vegetables. "What? Why?" Well, she wasn't faithful," Mom said delicately. "Dad was more blunt. Multiple affairs. Robert found out and filed for divorce." I leaned against the counter, processing this. "Okay, that's rough. But why are you telling me this?" There was another pause. I could almost hear them exchanging glances. "We were hoping," Mom began cautiously, "that maybe she could stay with you for a while."
What?
"No, absolutely not." "Nancy, please," Dad pleaded. "She's a mess. Her therapist thinks a change of scenery would do her good. And we thought, well, who better to keep an eye on her than her big sister?" I laughed bitterly. "You can't be serious. After everything she's put us through." But they kept pushing, guilt-tripping, pleading, and against my better judgment, I found myself wavering. "Fine," I snapped. "But only for a short time. And if she causes any trouble, she's out." "Got it." They agreed eagerly, thanking me profusely. After I hung up, I stood there, wondering what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. When Mike got home, I broke the news to him. He nodded slowly. "Okay, if it's important to you, we'll make it work." I hugged him tight, grateful for his understanding. A few days later, my sister arrived. She looked different, smaller somehow, without her usual brash confidence. "Hey," she said quietly as I let her in. "Hey yourself," I replied, unsure how to act. Let me show you to the guest room." The first few days were awkward but uneventful. My sister mostly kept to herself, coming out only for meals. She was polite to Mike, which surprised me. One evening I found her sitting on the balcony, staring into space. "You okay?" I asked, sitting down next to her. She shrugged. "Not really. But I guess that's to be expected, right?" I nodded, not knowing what to say. "I really screwed up, Nance," she whispered, her voice cracking. For a moment I saw the little girl she used to be, before all the drama and chaos. I felt a pang of sympathy. "Yeah, you did," I said gently. "But you can't change the past, you can only decide what to do next." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thanks. For letting me stay, I mean. I know we're not close." "You're still my sister," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Over the next few days I tried to help her. We talked about job applications, about maybe going back to school. She seemed receptive, even eager at times. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe my sister was finally ready to turn things around, but a little voice in the back of my head whispered a warning. "Don't let your guard down," it said. "You've been here before." Just when I thought things were looking up, everything went to hell. It started small. I noticed my sister's outfits getting skimpier, but I chalked it up to the warm weather. Then I caught her accidentally bumping into Mike in the kitchen, giggling like a schoolgirl. One day I came home early from work and found her lounging on the couch in what could barely be called underwear. "What are you wearing?" I demanded. She blinked innocently, just relaxing. "It's hot." I bit my tongue and went to change. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mike started acting weird too. He was jumpy, avoiding eye contact. I tried to brush it off, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Then came the day I saw it. I was using Mike's phone to look up a recipe when a message popped up, from my sister, with a photo attached. My hands shaking, I opened it, and there she was, posed in lingerie, smirking at the camera. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Scrolling up, I saw dozens more messages, each more explicit than the last. When Mike got home, I confronted him. "What the hell is this?" I shoved the phone in his face. He went pale. "Nancy, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Why my sister is sending you naughty photos." It's not like that, he protested. I told her to stop, I swear. She won't listen. I wanted to believe him, but the hurt was too raw. "And you didn't think to tell me?" He looked down. "I didn't want to cause problems. I thought I could handle it." I laughed bitterly. "Well, you sure handled it great." I stormed out, needing space to think. When I came back, I'd made up my mind. I found my sister in the kitchen, wearing next to nothing as usual. "You need to leave," I said, my voice cold. "Now." She turned, all wide-eyed innocence. "What? Why?" "Don't play dumb. I saw the messages, the photos. You're out. Tonight." Her face changed, the mask slipping. "Oh, you saw those? Guess your hubby's not as faithful as you thought." I clenched my fists. He told me everything. How you wouldn't stop, even when he asked. "You're sick, you know that." She laughed, cruel and mocking. "Please. I was doing him a favor. A hot piece like me beats a frigid witch like you any day." I saw red. "Get out. Now. And don't ever contact us again." She sneered, grabbing her bag. "Fine. Have fun with your boring life and your mediocre husband. He deserves better than you know, someone who can actually satisfy him." As she reached the door, she turned back. "You were always the ugly sister, Nancy. No wonder Mom and Dad preferred me." The door slammed behind her, leaving me standing there, shaking with rage and hurt. Mike appeared from the bedroom, looking shell-shocked. I walked past him, locking myself in the bathroom. As I slid down to the floor, the tears finally came. As I sat there, sobbing on the cold tile floor, I realized something. This wasn't just about my sister's betrayal. It was about years of pent-up resentment, of always being the responsible one, of watching her get away with everything while I played by the rules. I was still reeling from the confrontation with my sister when my phone rang. Seeing it was my parents, I almost didn't answer. But some masochistic part of me hit accept. Nancy Mom's voice was shrill. "What have you done? Your sister just called us," crying her eyes out. "How could you kick her out like that?" Dad's voice came on the line. "Nancy, we raised you better than this. To turn your back on family." "Stop right there," I cut him off. "You want to know what happened? Your precious little girl tried to seduce my husband. Sent him explicit photos, pranced around half naked. That's ridiculous," Mom interrupted. "Your sister would never do that. You're making this up to justify your cruelty." I felt like I'd been slapped. Making it up? Why the hell would I make this up? "We know you've always been jealous of your sister," Dad said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "But to invent such lies. I thought you were above that, Nancy." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out. Jealous? Of what exactly? Her constant screw-ups? The way you two bend over backwards to excuse her behavior? Do you have any idea what it's been like? Always being the good daughter, watching her get away with murder. Nancy Mom tried to interject, but I was on a roll. "No, you listen to me for once. I have spent my entire life trying to understand her, make allowances for her, but I'm done. You want to know why she's such a mess? Look in the mirror. You two created this monster with your constant coddling and excuses." There was a shocked silence on the other end. "If this is how you feel," Mom said, her voice icy, "maybe it's best we don't speak for a while. And don't be surprised if the rest of the family hears about your behavior." I laughed again, a hollow sound. "Go ahead. Tell them whatever you want. I'm done trying to live up to your impossible standards. I don't owe you or her anything." I hung up, my hand shaking. Then, slowly, I felt relief. It was like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. The fallout was swift and brutal. Just as my parents had threatened, my phone started blowing up with calls and messages from relatives, each one more disappointed and judgmental than the last. Aunt Sarah's voice dripped with disdain. "I always thought you were the sensible one, Nancy. How could you do this to your own sister? Uncle Bob didn't even bother with niceties. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, young lady. Family is everything." I tried to explain, to defend myself, but it was like shouting into the void. They'd already made up their minds. Then I made the mistake of checking social media. There it was, plastered all over my feed, relatives discussing my cruel and selfish behavior, lamenting how I'd shown my true colors. I closed the app and blocked them all. One by one, I went through my contacts, cutting ties with anyone who'd chosen to believe the worst of me without even hearing me out. It hurt, I won't lie. But with each person I cut off, I felt lighter. The only bright spot in all this mess was my grandmother. She called me out of the blue one afternoon. "Nancy, dear," her warm voice filled me with relief. "I've been hearing some troubling things. Want to tell me what's really going on?" I spilled everything. The whole, ugly story. When I finished, there was a pause. "Oh, my dear girl," she said finally, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But I want you to know I believe you. And I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. You focus on your own life now." And that's exactly what I did. Weeks turned into months. Mike and I worked through our issues, coming out stronger on the other side. I threw myself into my work, got a promotion. Life was good. Then, nearly a year after the blow-up, my phone rang. It was my parents. Against my better judgment, I answered. Nancy Mom's voice was frantic. "We need your help. It's your sister." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. What's she done now? Dad came on the line, sounding desperate. "She's out of control. Bringing strange men home, throwing wild parties. She won't listen to us at all." Last night Mom chimed in, her voice breaking. She kicked us out of our own house. We don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. And what exactly do you want me to do about it? Please, Dad begged. You've always been able to get through to her. Maybe if you talk to her. I cut him off. No. But Nancy. I said no. I'm done. You made your choice a long time ago. Now you get to live with it. How can you be so cold, Mom cried. We're your parents. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Funny. You didn't seem to care about that when you were calling me a liar and turning the whole family against me. I'm done. This is your mess. You clean it up. I hung up, then immediately blocked their numbers. It was over. Really, truly over. As I set the phone down, I felt a flutter in my stomach. I smiled, placing a hand over the small bump that was just beginning to show. The timing of this call seemed almost poetic as one chapter of my life closed definitively. Another was just beginning. Mike came into the room, concern etched on his face. I reached for his hand and placed it on my belly. His eyes widened, then softened with understanding and joy. We stood there for a moment, just enjoying the peace. Our little family, our new beginning. That night, as we lay in bed, I thought about the future. About the child growing inside me, about the life Mike and I were building together. I knew then that I had no intention of ever telling my parents or sister about this pregnancy. That part of my life was over. This my husband, our unborn child, our home, this was my family now, and it was more than enough.